Okay, good night.
Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's 6 o'clock, and I believe effectively to start on time. Have we got any apologies?
No apologies.
No apologies. Okay. Late items to be introduced by the chair. There aren't any. Declarations of interest. Has anybody got any interest? No interest at all. So the minutes of the meeting held on the 27th of June. We'll just go through them.
I've got something to share.
Yes, please. Come on.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things which I'm interested in the minutes was if there's some kind of update or where we are on the ward by ward insight into the state of the roads and pavements. So, in other words, the audit information for neighbourhood committees to consider. Yeah, I think it's important to sort of progress that because the information will exist centrally in the council. If it can be relayed down to committees, so in other words, the ward councillors, to better understand how the council have audited their roads and pavements, and that will help with conversations with residents when particular places are highlighted to them. They can reference that on the council's latest information in regards to quality assessments and potentially when it might be on the work programme. So it's quite important, I think, that we need an update on that. Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. Anybody else anything on the minutes? No? Okay, we'll take those as an accurate record then. So item 5, transport management topics. To tell us about this is you, Nigel.
It's me. It's a wide-ranging list of things that I've done. Almost an empty like this. I'd break it down into the headings that you've seen the report. So looking at temporary street works and temporary road works, gated area, massively regulated. Going back to 1991, changes to previous regulations which have been in place since 1957. And a lot of that was reflecting changes in the utility market and the idea of trying to stop some of that previous regime from having a blocking effect on new market entrants across the whole utility sector, but a lot of it was referenced around cable. Is it that fine? So, we've got a whole set of stuff which is, we've got some primary legislation, we've got some regulation of how to make and change those. And then we've got various codes of practice. Some of the codes of practice reflect the regulations, some of the codes of practice are codes of practice, and some are a mixture of both. So it's a complicated area. It's also important that things like the Gas Act set the scene for the operating companies as well, and their regulators. And the regulatory power is probably more important to the industry than the powers that local authorities. I think that's probably fair to say, because we all know the regulators can, they have power of bill setting, investment rates, etc., etc. So street works there's two elements to this: street works and road works. So street works are defined as those primarily done by utility companies. There are other operators who can acquire rights and go into that in detail, which is an interesting area at times. Roadworks are the works that are performed by the Highway Authority or on behalf of the Highway Authority, basically to paint roads. So in relation to street works, I'll put some numbers on here. There's about 8,000 varies year on year, but roughly speaking, there's about 8,000 registrable works. So where it says registrable works, the easiest way to imagine that is someone's going to dig. There are some other circumstances where they're not digging, but they need to put certain types of traffic management out. They therefore become registrable. But for as a rule of thumb, if it says registrable, they're digging a hole. About 4,000 there's about an additional 4,000, which is City Council's own works. They're also registrable, and both the notice and permit schemes require the same process for identifying forthcoming works. And then, as it says there's roughly about 1,500 emergency works. Now, a portion of those can be ours, if there's a storm, bad winter, or anything like that. majority of them are still the utility works, and it's basically where there's failure of connection to customers. So someone's without water, electricity, etc. As I say, both processes apply to street works and road works, but costs don't. So the cost of applying for a permit, they don't apply to our own works. That would just be a go around. But otherwise, the processes are the same. So for street works, the legislation, as I said before, is pretty much around trying to reflect the deregulation of the market and to provide opportunities for market entry. Company basically applies to government to become a statutory undertaker, which gives them, they register formally with that, they get an operating number, and that number is quoted on all of the correspondence that they do, so we know who they are. They acquire rights to place, retain and maintain their apparatus in the course of their business. But along with that, they have a duty to comply with the regulations, predominantly notices, permits, and standards around how they manage their works and standards around reinstatement. So that's kind of, it's not it shouldn't be a policed environment. It should run. The original legislation was designed so that it would run with responsible companies behaving responsibly. So local authorities were not put in a sort of policing role. In relation to street works, we have a duty to effectively coordinate. We have to keep it registered. Our duties are quite simple, really, in terms of we have to maintain the register of works and we have to actively coordinate works. Essentially, our overriding responsibility in the Traffic Management Act is to provide an effective network that's available to all users, and the all users is really important. It's not weighed in favour of road traffic. It asks us to embrace people with disability. It asks us to give higher levels of consideration around schools, etc. But basically, it's an effective network that's available for all users. Doesn't mean we can magic away congestion. It's asking us to do the best we can. We can inspect for both safety, so while works are ongoing, and we can inspect twice the reinstatement. Once immediately after it's been done, and we can inspect it again before a guarantee period expires. So usually that's 2 years, sometimes it's 3 years. It depends on the depth of the excavation. Those inspections are chosen at random. And so the system that registers and works spits out random sample inspections. And it does that against a profile which is set by a national formula. So in simple terms, you look at the last 3 years of work, average it out, and then it's 10 to 12% of that for the forthcoming year. So if an operator has had 3 heavy years, and then as a light year, there'll be potentially a higher percentage of their works will be actual works will be inspected, but it'll be 10 or 12% of the historic volume of works. We get paid for each of those inspections. It's a mere 50 quid. It's not gone up for years. Probably doesn't cover the cost of doing the inspections. We can inspect at a higher level, but it's entirely, the cost is entirely absorbed by us if we do. Sometimes in terms of reinstatements, it is worthwhile inspecting at a higher rate. There is a secondary process around defects. So we identify defects, there's a different payment mechanism cuts in for those. And we can also get that reinstatement redone at the undertaker's cost. If the undertaker doesn't follow that process and doesn't respond by fixing the reinstatement, we can step in and do it, recover the full cost. But there's some risk in doing that, but we do it from time to time. In terms of notices and permits, there is a difference between them. The notice is if you like, a passive type process where you basically serve a notice. And that's the system that was set up by the New Roads and Street Works Act.
The Traffic Management Act refined some of that notification process, but also allowed authorities to apply to the Secretary of State to implement permits. So we were the first unitary authority in the country to implement a permit scheme. We did that with guidance with the DfT. It took over a year of negotiating. We ended up with a scheme which was not quite what we originally applied for, but we were pleased to get a scheme and to be the first unitary to do it. So we have a funny mixed bag. Our major road network permits are less than major road networks. So we have two regimes running in parallel. Biggest difference was to say you need approval for a permit, whereas a notification is quite a passive process. We have powers of direction over both notices and permits. They are limited. With permits, the benefit is not only do we get paid for actually handling permits, but we also a permit requires more information from the operators. So we get much more detail about the way that they're going to work, the precise area they're going to work, because that's specified in the permit. Specify your works area. On a notice, it's a little bit more flexible. So when we're looking at permits, we know a lot more about the works. That's an extra cost for the undertakers. They are allowed to pass that cost on to customers. I think in its own way. Our powers of direction are limited pretty much to the timing of works. To some extent, the traffic management, and that's really where we bring our local knowledge into the arena to say, well, that won't work there, or in the past that's not worked there, or this has been the best method of working. We can direct them to do certain things around that. Manually controlling traffic signals is probably one of the popular ones. We can have some influence over the method of work, but of course it's the specific asset of the specific operator. We don't employ gas engineers, so or water engineers in that sense. So we have to trust what we're told in terms of the best technique. We do try and negotiate over no dig techniques where we can, but the industry, the utilities themselves are quite open to innovation. The contracting industry is quite traditional. 90% of what streets. Whatever we do in terms of the directions, we have to act reasonably, and we have to justify our directions. So we can't just say we don't want that. We have to say why, and it is challengeable. The important thing here is we have no blanket powers to reject works. Go back to what I said earlier about the way that the legislation is set up around deregulated market. That would be anti-competitive. Now, we can stop works if they're being done in a way which is dangerous. We can say no to works now, but we have to provide a window when those works can be done. So we might have a really big scheme that someone says, I want to do that at Easter. And we might go back to them and say, that's a 6-week holiday job. That needs to be done in the depths of summer. And we'll show them why, and we'll provide the statistics. And the onus is then on us, I think, predominantly to help them get into that window. Because we're saying no to what they originally. With emergency works, we don't have any of that, because it's all about responding to the urgency of it. And the notification, whether it's a permit or a notice, can come to us after the event. The other interesting thing with emergency works is they can start off as a gas leak outside number 26, for example, and then you find out the whole street needs the gas main relay. So an emergency response can very quickly turn into a scheme. And again, that scheme will not be pre-planned. It will be as a consequence of what's been found under the plan. So it's big things are not always planned, but lots of big things are planned. Say all of the stuff has got an established pipeline that comes from the utilities. They enter the registration process, but even before that, there's quite a detailed exchange of information between highway authorities and utility companies. Tend to meet mostly around the country. They tend to meet on a monthly basis. You have interim meetings where we know there's difficult things coming up. So there's quite a bit of exchange of information there, sometimes way ahead of the notification stuff coming. The other thing in the background to this is everybody's managing assets. So we'll have a work program for the next year that comes from a utility. And it's gone through their asset management process, and it might be leak detection or customer failure reports that have pushed it through their asset management system, and it's number 1. Good chance they're going to do that. When you get down to number 8, 9, 10 on the list, they're probably ones that need doing, but all of a sudden from nowhere, number 22 become number 2, because things fail. So although we have this pre-program of works, it doesn't always follow. And it's a bit like us with the roads, we have that asset management process. We know what our top 10 targets are. Then we have a bad winter and something goes from 40 to the top 5. We're all managing assets in that sense. I've included some things in here, some charts that it's at the back actually, that covers the notification periods. They can be fairly complicated to read, but basically the activity type, the longer your works are planned to be in the street, the longer the notification period for both permits and notices. That's the simple principle. And if it's minor works, then it's a much shorter period. And the definition of what's major, standard, minor are all governed by basically the durations. In terms of, I should mention that permit schemes are basically, the cost of permit schemes, the cost of an individual permit is set by a national charging structure and a really complicated spreadsheet of how that's made up. And that establishes what you can charge within the window of charges. There is a national maximum. The cost of what we charge for the permits is basically set by our costs to run the scheme, and we can only recover our costs. We can recover our full costs, but we can only recover our costs. So we can't make a surplus from that. That doesn't apply to the next section about charges for overrunning works. That's not within the permit costs. This is specifically, if you like, penalties. So the first bit of 4.13 is looking really at breaches of permit conditions or working without a permit. We can issue a fixed penalty notice. The levels are actually quite small if you consider the costs involved in construction. I'm not saying that this necessarily happens, but £500 a day is for working without a permit is not a lot of money when you think about the costs involved in construction and the costs involved in a loss of service to a customer. So, but that's what they are. Again, nationally fixed. When you're talking about actual overruns, this is where someone legitimately goes in to start works and overruns and doesn't manage to obtain a valid extension for their works. Therefore, that's the point at which they're overrunning, when they haven't got a valid extension. So it doesn't matter that they said they were going to do it in 7 days. If they're still there in 9 days, but they've got a valid extension, then the charge won't apply. But if they haven't got a valid extension, they're on day 9, the charge will apply. So the charges are as shown in the table there. For particularly, there's a distinction between if the works are in the carriageway or if the works are outside of the carriageway, i.e. on the footway or verge. It's more expensive if you're on the carriageway. Where it says about traffic sensitive streets, they tend to be our major road network, and you can imagine what they are. Where it says non-traffic sensitive 0 or 1, those category numbers of 0 or 1, they relate to again a national definition based on million standard axle usage of those roads. Now, in a city like Derby, I don't think we've got any non-traffic sensitive 0 or 1 roads. 0 tend to be motorway, by the way, so that it's quite a high bar. I don't think we have any traffic sensitive category 2s either. Obviously, as you go down 2, 3, 4, you're talking about less standard axles. Roughly, 80% of our road network is type 4 because they're residential streets. Probably if you add in type 3s and 4s, we're looking at 90% of our network. So that gives you a flavour of those charges. You do have to collect evidence, photographic evidence generally for those. They are challengeable. There is a little bit of case law that's developed around those charges and what is and what isn't overly officious. Lots of authorities went quite hard with those charges to test the process at the beginning. And some authorities have found it very difficult to recover the sums of money. We have had one or two occasions where we've had payments of £60,000 plus for overruns. I have to say that's not happened for a while because the industry has learned. I mean, £10,000 a day for being on a traffic sensitive street after the first day, you know, that is starting to be quite painful. So if you imagine that you know, somebody overstays by 4 days, you know, they're going to be paying £25,000 for the privilege for that. But we have had a few starred examples, but not for quite a long time. The industry learns, and the industry tends to pass those charges on to the contractors as well. So the contracting industry learns fairly quickly in that respect. I'm putting it a little bit just to reinforce our powers of directions. We've sort of covered it already in terms of, you know, we can ask for aerial direct works, but we have to justify that. We have a duty to look at traffic flow, pedestrian movement, passenger transport, accessibility, etc. And a lot of this becomes site by site specific because there's no two places that are the same. Flows are different, etc. Our role, though, is fundamental to facilitate work. No one's out there digging for fun. They're all digging for a purpose. It's expensive, you know, and they're digging for a lot of the time for the benefit of customers or for the longevity of the asset. And again, going back, some of the industry regulators set an investment standard for the companies, so they're out there delivering that investment plan. It's directed. I think the only other thing on that is that the market has disaggregated a lot in the structure of contracting and subcontracting. Very few of the utilities do routine works with their own directly enabled employed staff. They will still retain some specialists for particular difficult, dangerous, or very industry-specific work. But a lot of the time, they're passing that work out through network and framework contracts, etc., usually with different incentives and penalties. But it does mean that they'll have a contractor for traffic management, they'll have a contractor for excavation, they'll have a contractor for traffic signals, they'll have a contractor for reinstatement. And that's the disaggregation that's happened over the last 25 years in the market. It's less and less been about a utility company with its own workforce who would turn up with all the skills, do a job and go away. You now get all these different elements, and that can be really frustrating. It's really frustrating, and it's frustrating for my teams who are constantly chasing this kind of level of disaggregation. Of course, if you look at some of the big national utility companies, they'll have more than one traffic management company operating in the same area, and they'll have it on a framework, and they'll either do it through a process of bid or pricing, or they've got guaranteed minimum amount of work. So we can have several traffic management companies, traffic signal companies working for the same. On the other side of the fence, we can also have the same providers working for multiple utilities. So we spend a lot of time chasing this sort of stuff, particularly the biggest bugbear for everybody. Yes, it gets to your inboxes as councillors as well, is where this company setbacks. And there's a legitimate element there where tarmac might be curing, but those works might be finished on, I don't know, a Tuesday. Traffic signals are still there Wednesday night because they've been hired until a certain time, or because there's a chain of communication to go to a contractor to get them removed, and the contractor's doing 7 of the jobs, and that's the last one of his job for Wednesday or even Thursday morning. That is really frustrating. If that's within the permit window, there's no charge applies. It's where we are in the disaggregation of this, and we spend again. We will get direct reports from people, or our teams will see things. Our inspectors will see things. We will try and chase them down and tell them to get them removed. Our inspectors do occasionally, if they can, they will move those traffic signals to a safe location. Quite often, the control mechanisms are locked, so we can't switch them off. But we've also got to be able to safely get them, onto a grass verge where they're not impeding anybody, etc. So it's a risk for us to do that. But there are occasions where we do go out and do that because we, just can't wait any longer. It's on the A514, the A6, etc. We can't tolerate it. We've got to go and do something about it. So I don't know if you want to pause there, because the next bit is a bit of a jump into section 106 and contributions. If you've got any questions around works activities, I'll do what I can.
Well, just to start with, you're right when you said the A514 straight through the middle of my ward.
Right.
And it's honestly, I think there's more roadworks on it, than there are more days with roadworks than without. And we had one yesterday that it's the National Grid, and it was emergency work. I know work needed doing, but work was done and completed, and we had to wait nearly 48 hours for the traffic signals to get removed. Andy Brown had to come in the end and bring people up and stuff. And I know I had a meeting with all of the contractors. I was invited to go on that, so if you want.
Yes, you came to one of the.
But I don't think they understood. They were basically saying we're within our permit. Yeah. And I just think, particularly the water board, I think they're the worst, Severn Trent. They just put in a really long time. So they put in 10 days. It might only be 4 days worth of work. And of course, they're actually within their permit. There's nothing they can do. It's really frustrating, isn't it? Anybody else got any questions? Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Nigel. I've got a few issues here, and one of them you've already mentioned, and it is a real issue for us as councillors. You're talking about, the fragmentation of contractors. You've got the main contractor, residents say, what's the work? Well, it's Severn Trent. Well, it's Severn Trent, but it's not being carried out by Severn Trent generally, unless you say it's a very specialist issue. You might get a team, whatever, X contractor and Y traffic management contractor, and they all have a window. If it's an emergency work, then it's not permitted. It wouldn't necessarily be a window of time or whatever. Quite often, and I don't know why, these works seem to sort of go right up to Friday afternoon. And that's the issue for us mostly, because during the week we get a little bit more support. There's a little bit more sort of people available within the contractors or Severn Trent or within the council. It's a real problem when you've got temporary traffic lights, sometimes three-way, causing absolute chaos in many wards, including my own in Mickle. I've had several situations. And the traffic lights are up. You can physically see, we're not trained as councillors, but you can physically see there's no reason for those traffic lights to be in place anymore. You can have a conversation with, I call them emergency highways, but, on-call highways, and have a word with the officer and explain the situation. And the conversations I've had several times is, I understand what they're saying. It's Severn Trent. It's not the council. There's a risk to us coming on site. Assessing that situation and pulling those traffic lights to one side. But if anything we can do to just be a little bit more, less risk averse to making that call, because, transport officers within the council are very highly trained. They know their stuff. They can assess the situation. If there's any doubt, they can say, look, I'm not happy to take these traffic lights off this road. The tarmac may be curing, whatever the reason is, leave them in place. We understand, we can relay that. But there is many opportunities, I think, that we've missed where we could be a bit more decisive as a council and move those traffic lights to one side, get the traffic flowing, and then they get collected on a Monday morning when the contractor comes at the end of their whatever time and date they've been told that that's the end of the works. So anything we can do on that, because it is a massive frustration, and it's the councillors get it in the net.
Absolutely, we get it. We're the ones who get it. Nothing to do with us. I'm sure you've all had it. Nothing to do with the council at all, and yet it was a bloody council. No, it's not. This is somebody without power to their house. It's got Western Power Distribution dealing with an issue at 8 o'clock at night. it's not the council, it is an emergency situation that needs doing. And we understand that. I think all of us do, and all of the general public do as well. The problem they have is when the job is done, lights are still there for 24, 48 hours afterwards. But of course, they're in their pen. Perhaps we need to look at, say, having our inspectors go out and say, in my opinion, this job is complete. I'm rescinding your permit and you need to come and clear site.
Well, I mean, I was trying to think from a council's point of view, just being able as a process for us to actually highlight the concern and say, look, we genuinely believe these lights are in place and they don't need to be anymore. Just officers really to take that on board and say, OK, there's always someone 24/7, 7 days a week in this council that can visit. If there's obviously major issues elsewhere, we understand that might not be able to happen. But generally, all we're asking for is someone to visit and assess and intervene if they can, based on making a call and not being afraid to make that call. I'd say probably 99 times out of 100, there won't be an issue. But even if there is that one time where, OK, on hindsight, maybe we shouldn't have taken, I think we shouldn't be that risk averse is to not intervene. So that's one of the points, Chair. The second one would be talk about DCC not being able to sort of police every environment, and nor should they, because obviously, emergency works, planned permit works, you can't micromanage everything. You have to obviously ensure that the contractors can get on with their job without interference in most cases. However, overarching ownership of things. Now, I've got an example of a major Severn Trent issue in Mickleover Ward to a main route that not just affected Mickleover, but affected the whole city. Well, maybe the west side of the city. You know which one I'm talking about. South Station Road, it was cut off. Now, my experience is, this is my opinion, officers may disagree, but I believe that if the council had been a little bit more proactive and willing to be proactive, not take ownership of it because it was a Severn Trent issue, but work with us at a local level, we could have reduced that window of closure, because it was about 2 weeks all in all, which was a major length of time, and the disruption was extreme. And I remember speaking to officers and saying afterwards, look, can we really review this? Because I think lessons can be learned and we can do things better. If we can support you and you support us, we could probably have pressed Severn Trent, maybe not done the work for them, but supported them to actually reduce that closure window and get the job done. And I think, I won't speak for Councillor Polt, who's not here, but in Spondon, there's a recent or ongoing issue, which is not the same, but similar. And I think I sense from what I've been picking up that they may be feeling the same kind of frustrations, where really councillors sometimes do need support from officers. Yeah. We don't get that on the ground. There's a reluctance to get involved sometimes, where it's not the council, it's Severn Trent, let them get on with it. Well, yeah, but we've got a major issue here, we need support. So that's something which I think councillors really do need at a local level. And finally, sorry, Chair, the local councils receiving roadworks permit notifications or advanced works. Now sometimes we get good contractors who reach out to the councillors, tell them what the plan is. We get inputs. There's been a really, really good one in Mickleover recently, where top of Kickling Drive, there was some electrical infrastructure going in to feed some electrical charges. Really brilliant sort of proactive liaison with the contractor. We were able to input, come up with a scheme that was actually far better than the originally planned temporary lights. We said, look, close the road, we can go this way, go that way. We worked together. It was brilliant. Now, the work extended over 3 weekends, but that was a really good example of how we can all work together. We know about it, we talk about it. That was because they reached out to us. Officers didn't reach out to us via a list to say, in Mickleover, in Chellaston, in Normanton, in Derwent, whatever. We need that list. I understand that officers do compile that list potentially, from what I've been told, but there seems to be a breakdown in it. It's reaching our inboxes, like planning applications, weekly planning applications. It must exist because obviously the permits have been agreed. So we do need that list because it helps us. Because all of a sudden we know then if the 514, or Station Road, or whatever it might be, we can see it. And it isn't a surprise to us when we get up on a Saturday morning and we look at our messages and we've got loads of messages saying the road's cut off or this, and we didn't know about it, you know. So that would really help us as well. So they're the three things I think that I'd like to feed back to Transport Ops. You can take those back, Nigel.
I'm not sure we compiled a weekly listing, but systems changed to a national system. Some of the reportability is not used to have as a overall system. It's good. It's good in terms of visibility. It's not quite as good in terms of reporting. But I'll have a look and see what we can produce. What would you want? Because there's different ways you can do this. You can have what's going to happen tomorrow, or you can have what we've got in the longer term plan, if you like. And if you get both, it's confusing. So, you know, if we can generate a report, what would you want to know? Would you want to know what's going to happen? Say, here we are, you know, middle of October. Would you want to know what's going to happen in November?
Well, and one thing I was going to say to you, Matthew, is do all of you use one network, one dot network?
Yeah, but retrospectively, I don't religiously open it every day.
It does do up to 12 months ahead. You can do 2 weeks ahead, 3 months ahead, and 12 months ahead. And I do use that quite regularly. And if we don't, I'll just share that information with you. And that does work quite well. My biggest problem with doing what you're saying, it would be great. However, doesn't cover the emergencies.
It doesn't.
And they're the ones really, aren't they? Because when it's planned works, we normally work with council and they will work together to around a quiet period. And of course, that's not when we've really got a problem. It's when it's the emergency and you can't legislate for that. So I understand that.
And of course, just because you've got a permit, I mean, you have to start on day.
Well, let's be honest, you don't need to put a permit in until 11 o'clock the next morning if you're doing emergency.
No, you don't. That's right. But even if you're doing planned works, planned works start 1st of August.
Yeah.
It doesn't actually bind you to starting on the 1st of August.
No, it doesn't, does it? If it's for the whole of August, you might not start to the 31st.
Which is why some of the things like One Network, etc. You know, people look at the AA in the past and other organisations tried to take the notice and permit information as a way of providing information to customers through SAP. First thing they do is complain. They say, "Well, that's supposed to be there, but it's not."
Yeah.
No, because it's allowed within the rules. That flexibility is allowed. It's really hard to get definitive information.
Anybody else? I see. When you go.
Mine might be a bit different. You know, on roadway refreshing the lines. You know, it's taking ages.
Yeah.
You know, refreshing. You know, we're having accidents happening there and everything. And you know, the highways are not doing the work. Can you highlight on why?
I mean, basically there's backlog, and there always will be, because they wear out faster than they can be. It's like painting the Forth Bridge, effectively. And I suppose it does come down to some of that is traditional revenue activity as well.
Yeah, but
And what activities are it?
It's revenue funded activity, a lot of it. So some of that, obviously, you know, we don't have the funding to go out and do it all. There's similar issues with some road signs as well, where they're beyond the state of which we would like them to be in. And it's just trying to keep up with the demand against the resources we've got. Where the lines are missing as a result of works, and the utility company should put them back as a reinstatement. If they don't, then that's a failure and triggers a defect.
the funny thing is, they'll do half the line.
Yeah.
You know, it's only half the line.
Yeah,
Full line. You might as well do a full one, but they'll just do the bit that they, you know, looks so bad.
no, I agree. And you find it with the yellow lines as well.
Yeah.
They're not quite aligned properly, or not quite right, or they just do. But you'll see it as well with reinstatements. We could go out and have a little walk around, and you'd find reinstatements that are the oddest shape. And you think, why aren't they just square?
Yeah.
And it's simply because it's a very cost conscious industry. You know, talking there not so much about the utility contracting. They're cost conscious. They won't dig out anything they don't have to. They won't reinstate anything they don't have to. They'll do the minimum, and they're there to make a profit.
That's one. You say about the revenue, people who want to pay and get the work done, they still don't get it on time.
It depends what sort of lines you're talking about. You know, if it's protective entrance markings, then
what we'll traditionally do is, and I'm speaking on behalf of my highways maintenance colleagues to some extent, traditionally wait until we've got a batch to do, because a line, we don't have a lining gang within the council. So we'll rent one in. It's traditionally something like £1,500 to get them to Derby. So they're not going to come and do one line. So we'll wait until we've got a batch, and then, you know, £1,500 unit cost of everything else comes down. So that's one of the other reasons why there's always a backlog. It's because we're waiting until we've got 4 days work, because otherwise you'd be paying them the turnout cost for one job.
So it looks like, I mean, there's more than 4 days work in one on its
So
own.
there will be, yeah. But might not have the funding to do more than 1 full day's work. That's the thing.
Yes. So you inspect sort of 12% of the works that are carried out.
Yeah.
How many of those fail inspection?
Varies. It depends which category. On safety, generally speaking, most sites are pretty good nowadays on safety. At one time, you'd probably be failing 15% on safety. Now that doesn't just go into that a little bit. You can fail on safety, but they haven't given it an opportunity to put it right. So you might get 15% fail on the first visit. You give them a reasonable time to put it right, re-inspect, with no extra fee, by the way, for us. And then basically the failure rate would generally come down to about 9%. Reinstatements are quite interesting. So on reinstatements, there's been various studies around the country suggesting that around 60% of reinstatements are not compliant. Now that doesn't mean they're all failing. Some of them are actually over specification, but that can lead to other issues about strength in the surrounding carriageway. So at reinstatement, we probably find around about 10-15% failure, but it can go up and down. So you get some really good contractors or some really good reinstatement gangs, and you get very, very low rates of failure. Safety is probably where the industry has really turned itself around in the last 20 years. It used to be that signing, lighting, and guarding was safety stuff. Compliance was pretty poor 20 years ago. It's now much better, but it does vary. I mean, you get a new contractor come into the local area with a new workforce, and you can get a real spike in failures. But it goes up and down. We measure it quarter by quarter. There's an intervention. If we get repeat failure above a certain level, then we can take enforcement measures against them, which can actually lead to stopping work or reducing their ability to work in certain ways.
And if a contractor fails more than somebody else, would you then go and pick on them to or try and pick them up there or to see what's going on? Obviously, you're missing 90% of the works when you inspect. So would you, if you find a problem with a particular contractor, just go and do a bit extra on that contractor somewhere else?
So the sample inspections that are generated, they have to do that. But you're absolutely right in terms of, particularly if it's reinstatement, because after the guarantee period's expired, the cost of fixing cost of fixing that comes back to the local authority. So there might be circumstances where we are really concerned about quality workmanship or materials that have been used, and we will usually put them on notice that because we've had failure at a certain rate, we are going to look at more. We also have the ability to do core sampling, which is initially at our own cost, but we can recover the cost of any failures that we find.
And the fees for running over, I know you said you've had some big ones in the past. We have many people run over at the moment. We get
No, most. Be careful what I would say this, but there are ways that if you're an operator on the network, you can protect yourself against the costs.
Exactly.
By making sure that you
application or whatever.
Yeah, and it's very, very hard for us to turn those down. And I'm not accusing any of the utilities of anything necessarily, but I think you can all see where the gaps are.
Game, haven't they?
And if we are told
that job can't be completed because a special valve is required, we are in no position to argue against that.
So they could easily say, this job's going to take 10 days, knowing actually it's only going to take 5.
Oh, that's one way of doing it. Isn't it?
And that's what you would do. Let's be honest, you would build that safety mechanism so you don't get any fines.
So they do pay the extra permit for going over the boundary of that, but you're talking the difference.
They say this job is going to take 10 days.
Yeah.
They don't pay extra for that, do they?
Well, it moves it into a different category of works. But you're talking about the difference between what 70 and 130 quid as against a 5,000.
£5,000 worth paying the 130 quid or the extra 50, 60 quid, whatever it is. Yeah, essentially, huge fines. Matthew.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just to wrap up then, from my point of view, I think there's. I thanks, Chair, for pointing that out. So I didn't realise you could actually change the date and see, future.
Yeah.
But I'd still say leave it to officers really to see what's most appropriate. Even if you do it as a trial, I think it would be good. And the reason why I think it would be good to have an email sent to ward councillors, all okay, it don't have to be on a ward basis. It can be just for all wards, for all councillors. Yeah. When we talk, as the process spoke about overruns and fines and whatnot, where we do have that information and we know in advance when that permit is from wherever. Where there is a case where we know that the work is complete, can see it is, and traffic lights are still in place, then it overruns by 2 days, if Saturday and Sunday, and then on Monday morning it's cleared away. We can then help you with evidence to say that work was not finished in time.
Yeah.
The permit was still Friday. Yeah, technically the work was finished on Friday, but the work impact, the traffic management wasn't cleared till 10 a.m. on Monday morning. Therefore, it's a breach.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about. We need them to just step up. And I think that will really help us to have that information to help you to say, look, this is unacceptable. And if this council gets situations where we can maybe get the message out there, we're not going to put up with traffic permits overrunning or traffic management, then they may book their ideas up and actually be a bit more proactive on a Friday afternoon. I get it. Contractors have done their jobs. They've put the tarmac down. It's Friday, looking forward to the weekend. Job done. They're not bothered about the traffic management. It's not their job. It's a different firm. We're saying there needs to be joined up working here because your responsibility is to finish the job entirely. Let people know you've done it in time. Get those people out there. Take the traffic lights down. For multiple reasons.
The public can see when the traffic lights are gone. They think the work is complete.
So help us to help you is what I'm saying. I think that we could.
Martin, do you want to say anything, Martin? Have you got anything?
No, just I don't, probably because I haven't got so many different things going through my ward.
You don't know how sorry for the
I'm feeling your pain. And probably thinking I'm quite glad I don't have this on quite such a regular basis. But it's been interesting to learn. What was the name of that? Was it a website? Did you say
it's one.network?
Yeah.
.net.
That's the public facing version of what all of the stuff goes into from the government. So say for transparency, it's really good.
It is, but again, it doesn't show emergencies straight away, like the one that was in Chellaston this week. That we saw they were there, went on one network, there's nothing on it, so that's clearly an emergency. And it did go on about an hour or so later, so that's clearly an emergency, and you can pick it up from there. As I said, I feel very sorry for the Chad councillors because they've got Nottingham Road that runs through it. And I was looking on one network the other day because I'm particularly sad. And it had 5 different lots of temporary traffic lights along all the way through. I was thinking, thank God I don't represent that one.
And you care as well. I mean, the reputational issue as well here, because quite often, you wake up on again Saturday morning. It's always Saturday morning. All hell's breaking loose. You didn't know. You're trying to find out, and the perception is it's the blooming council again digging up the roads. They're useless.
But the council never dig up the road.
But and quite often it's not the council, it's a utility company. And with the information that we've got, we can correct people and say, actually, hang on a minute, it's not the council, it's this company or that company. And
With
this
the
is
greatest respect to you, Matthew, you can say that to my little face, right? The general public still
Yes,
think it's the council.
I know.
And I understand what I've started referring to them now as utility repairs.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure it makes any difference.
But yeah,
It's just
Interesting you mentioned about reputations. I mean, feedback we get from utility companies and contractors is that we are quite harsh here. We have some quite high standards,
Okay.
Particularly around the way that traffic management is set up. So we were one of the first in the country to go down the route of applying the same rules and similar inspection levels to our own works as to utility works, and reporting that to everybody, publicly reporting it. And actually coming back to enforcement action on failure, one of the first and probably the biggest enforcement actions we took was against our street lighting contractor, original street lighting contractor when the PFI first started, because they were digging more holes than they could service. And that was leading in safety failures everywhere. And we actually banned them from working on any of our major road network. So, you know, we played with, one of the things that we're expected to do is play equitably with anybody who's digging the roads up. So we've shown up our cards in that respect. And we've been doing reporting of our own works and our own failure rates at a very early stage, long before it became considered best practice. But, you know, because we were first with permit schemes, first in the region, but the other thing is be we don't tolerate footpath closed across the road, because that's not right. You know, in nearly all circumstances, that's not right. One, you're taking the risk of directing someone across the road, but you're also downgrading, you know, people who are walking, you know, and you get that in certain contexts around district centres, schools, etc. That's a really bad message. But you will see it in other parts of the country. And those 5 traffic signals on Nottingham Road, they won't all be there at the same time. No, not all 5. No.
I'm sure I never tell a lie. I'm not.
They'll be on the map, but if we go out there in reality, they won't be there. Because you get that.
I didn't actually go and check.
Yeah, you know, you get it, again, we're back to that sort of permit thing where you can get those overlapping dates. And I think on that Nottingham Road one, they're all one operator that's doing
It's city fibre, isn't it?
Yeah, and so it's showing almost like the progress of work, but to allow the work to progress so they don't have dead time waiting just for a permit to start, they overlap. So it comes out as 5 and you think, crikey, that's horrendous. But in reality, it's kind of like, what's that moving up the road?
Yeah. As I said, I didn't go and have a look.
These again are the vagaries of what the permit allows and that sort of precision of information. And the only way to change that precision of information is to go beyond a permit scheme and nature scheme and go to basically what is a road space charging scheme. They are available. There aren't many. Kent have got one. And that basically means that it applies to all works, council works and utility works. And what, in very simple terms, go through a process of applying based on the road type. You pay from day one for occupancy. Obviously, the incentive there is that when you cleared your works and you've gone away, you stop paying. But they are really difficult to be able to justify. And it's really difficult for non-county authorities because of the nature of the road network to sort of put them in place. And it's not all milk and honey. There is some real difficulties with it in terms of resourcing and how you need to put it together. But the application process is really long, complicated. But if you get there, you basically get a scenario where if you get your permission to work, your incentive to be there on day one is absolute because you're paying from day one. And your incentive to get off site is because as soon as you stop paying.
Yeah, interesting question here then. So, I mean, you're head of traffic and transport, so I'm assuming if you thought that was a perfect idea for Derby, you'd be badgering the cabinet member over the last few years to sort of try and implement it. I'm not aware that that's happened. But is there a hybrid approach? Could that be applied to major routes, but not? No, so it has to be the whole footprint of the city.
Yeah, so you can have a hybrid of permits and notices as we've got, but if you have a lane rental scheme, you have a lane rental scheme. And there are things on minor roads where it kind of applies, but not with the full effort. But on major roads, it's quite. So it's a really good way of managing.
So it sets really. So what would the main reason why you haven't recommended that in terms of Derby City? Like the number one reason that's stops you from saying this is the thing that I would recommend you implementing?
It's really difficult to get approval for. There's a lot of consultation that you have to do. You also need to set up a whole management framework around it, because it is a lane rental scheme is allowed to make a profit. But profits from lane rental schemes need to be jointly managed by the council and utilities as to how that surplus is going to be spent. So if you take Kent, for example,
They was.
but Kent, for example, they invested surplus from their first year of operating into looking at, I can't remember whether it was already.
Is that revenue, by the way, or capital?
Doesn't it? Just be called.
No, it's income.
I think it's income, and in that sense, it can be treated as either. And it's probably up to the management board that you have to settle deciding whether they want to put capital constraints on it or whether they want to call it revenue. But the thing that Ken did was basically sponsor the development of something that was at R&D level, which was a rapid reinstatement, small reinstatement process. Basically involves a tanker firing a blob of tarmac into a pothole at super high speed where it becomes self-leveling and then drying it. And they spent, a couple of £100,000 worth of profit. Now, everybody benefited from that because the utilities have those sorts of small demands around ironwork. Local authority has more tolls. So it's great in that sense, but you've got to have this management board. You've got to do a lot of consultation. You've got to go to the Secretary of State and get permission. And getting a permit scheme was a long and arduous process. Now, I think the government is suggesting that lane rental schemes are going to be easier to get. Part of the 30-point plan that was announced a couple of weeks ago, the plan for drivers, they were suggesting that lane rental schemes would be a little bit easier to get. And they're also suggesting, I think, in the 30-point plan that half the profits from lane rental should be diverted into pothole repairs.
Yeah, are we talking hundreds of thousands of pounds then of income for this? Or I mean, obviously it's difficult to compare.
I just modeled it once a few years ago.
But it's a significant amount of income.
Yeah, but don't forget that costs also apply to the local authority, whereas in permits, the processes apply, but cost don't. In lane rental scheme, the council has to pay that rate as well. So that goes into the fund that joint management board then gets the choice about how it's disposed. So our costs go up. Now that's one of the big blockers, particularly where we're seeing that our resource availability is falling or constrained. So that you say it's not all milk and honey, but that is the best way of probably securing your network, but it comes with a big administrative weight as well. We have to be able to service that, so we have to staff up to it.
I suppose it depends where the balance of who's doing the work. Is it the council doing most of the work, or is it private contractors?
It's somewhere between 2/3, 1/3.
Yeah, because we got the figures here, didn't we? How many was it? 1,200 with the council, 1,200 and then 8,000.
Yeah, some years it comes down more to 50-50, but generally speaking, and sometimes it's a bit higher. It's 75-25 for the utilities, but generally speaking, in most years, if you flatten out the numbers for the last 10 years, it's around 12,000 intervention. It's 2/3, 1/3 split. But we might tend to be doing the bigger schemes. We don't do many 1 metre by 1 metre hall repairs. We go out and do a whole street.
Yeah, so it's really seeing it's a very fine balance in that, isn't it? You could spend an awful lot of money, and then get little returns on it, and you've still got to service all those staff that's really tough, isn't it?
Pay to fix your own potholes, eh?
Well,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
And you're paying it into a joint board, which you have to have by legislation, which involves the private sector, who then decide how that money is going to spend. So, at the moment, the incentive is to spend that money on innovation. So funding no dig technologies, that rapid reinstatement stuff, etc. Or maybe even funding schemes which are to mutual benefit. But you're not guaranteed that you're going to get the money back that you paid in. That's not how the scheme's supposed to work. So you have to be able to take the rough with the smooth a little bit on this,
It's interesting.
I get it. Any more?
No.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Well, we're going to move on to the second part then.
Okay. So looking at section 106 contributions, simple terms, I mean, so you will know as councillors what section 106 is, but just in case, it tends to become, well, it always is related to development, and it's designed to mitigate or enhance areas where there's impact from developments, and it often does include improvements to highway network. It can be treated as capital, it can be treated as revenue. So some of you who've been around the council for a long time will be aware where we've used section 106 to as revenue funding to put a bus service into a new development, for example. And so it can be capital or revenue in that respect. Unlike section 278 agreements, where a third party is allowed to carry out works on our behalf, so they're allowed to mend the highway on our behalf under an agreement. Section 106 is really funding coming to the authority, and it's for the authority to implement the projects. And this is where it starts to get a little bit complicated, because a lot of the agreements can be bespoke. They're not all the same. The heads of terms, which I'm sure is something that you've all heard officers say in the past, probably to your frustration, in terms of, you know, what heads of terms are, i.e. what's allowed, where are we allowed to spend that money? So they will be different, and they will be negotiated on a case-by-case basis. We sometimes chance projects, sometimes we have lists of things that we might want over time, and it's less defined. And some things on that list will get delivered, other things won't, depending on the money and depending on sort of how the impact of that development is felt. Sometimes they can be timed in terms of, we won't trigger the section 106 until a certain amount of houses are built or occupancy. So particularly a bus service, you don't run a bus service to a development site. You might run it when you've got 400 houses there. So typically there'll be triggers in that respect. Most of the schemes will be included in the capital programme. So they are, in that sense, they are going to be based on resources and what else is in the programme, because we've only got so many people. They're all, generally speaking, been over programmed for the last 20 years on the capital programme, although we are trying to change that in the last couple of years. So, you know, these schemes sort of will go into the programme. Generally, we can't access the funding until we've committed a scheme. Commitment can mean putting it into the programme. Sometimes there can be some additional tests. Sometimes, some of you will be aware, particularly in recent years, where a lot of our housing growth is right on our boundaries. We're not planning authority, we don't own the funding. So there's a little bit of extra administration to be done there. It's not overly complicated, but it can just add a little bit to it. Contributions under section 106 for new physical infrastructure, as it says in the report in 4.8, don't usually cover ongoing maintenance and revenue costs for that infrastructure. There may be a commuted sum, and traditionally those commuted sums are held against the gross replacement cost of that asset rather than to pay for ongoing maintenance. This is a real issue for local authorities around the country. Lots of capital money coming in from government, coming in as a result of development, and the pressure of declining revenue in respect of that. So we've got it with some of our major capital grants in TCF, where we've had to Transforming Cities Fund. We've had to test out the new infrastructure almost piece by piece, what we're putting in. And great, we can put new stuff in. But we're having to be really careful about the energy content, this data content, digitization, and all those little bills that start to come. And sometimes we can capitalize some of those for the first 1, 2, 3 years, maybe a little bit longer in respect to some assets. But generally speaking, there's a cliff edge of a bill coming back to the council. And in some circumstances, it comes back straight away. So as soon as we do it, we get a bill from day one. And that's a real pushing issue. So on energy, for example, my service, which has got traffic signals, bus shelters, etc., we were £130,000 overspent on energy last year. And nearly all of that is a consequence of the increase in energy prices. In terms of maintenance contractors for bus shelters and for predominantly traffic signals and some annual inspections we have to do on a statutory basis. Last year, we were again overspent, but we just about contained it within the service budgets. That pressure is growing, but the real pressure is energy, and it's not getting any cheaper. So that's kind of where we are in relation to section 106 and the difficulties we have. I mean, in a lot of cases where we're looking at those asset costs and can we afford to put the assets in, really the answer is that we need cheaper energy, more money. We have to have less asset. Basically, we've got no latitude to just keep increasing our pressures. And I know, for many of you, that's difficult. This is a citywide issue. I know Councillor Holmes is particularly in your ward, and we've been kicking this backwards and forwards for, it feels like, nearly 2 years. I know the pressure you're under from your residents, and you know, because I've explained it to you several times, that I can't add to my pressures. I've got no latitude to do that. But none of the schemes that you've earmarked and your fellow councillors have earmarked are bad schemes. They're all really good schemes. They all do something for your community, either now or with the pent-up demand that they will release when they're in. But the circumstances are such that without the revenue funding, and the revenue funding is going down and the costs are going up, I'm in a really difficult situation.
We had something in my own ward, Celia, Councillor Celia Ingle. She's identified S106 when it's got some street lighting on back lane, and it does need to go in. We've been told they can't afford the electricity bill that will come with that, which seems ridiculous. But actually, I think I can only tell you by my own electricity bill at home, which has doubled.
Yeah.
If yours has doubled, I imagine yours is a lot more than mine.
Yeah.
I kind of get it, but I also know that job needs doing.
Yeah.
And I know Celia is particularly frustrated with it, but I understand that the problem I've got is I can't see energy coming down anytime soon.
No. And in street lighting, I mean, you probably know this, but just for benefit, last year, street lighting bill for the council was thick end of £500,000 over budget.
Sorry?
£500,000, just under £500,000 over budget. And there's another anticipated price increase on the horizon. It's just going to push that again. So without us doing anything with the scale of the asset, the cost is going up, and it's already a really energy crushing issue.
Which is the energy bill for streetlights. Well, you're meant to ask.
So I said £500,000 over budget. What is that?
Well, I imagine it's probably. So I would guess then it used to be £500,000 before, and it's doubled in price.
I don't know the exact number.
So that the problem with business energy, that had no cap on it.
Yeah.
And I'm speaking from experience, I know one of mine went up by 5 times, which is ridiculous. Councillor Hayes.
We need Rolls Royce to sort one of those small ones. Yeah,
Well, I do agree with you, actually.
We do. Anyway, look, Nigel, my beef isn't with you and your office. With all respect to officers,
No, I think
I
we
understand.
understand each other's
We completely understand, but widening this slightly is main issue for me is local plans. This council has a local plan. It agrees, whether we agree or not, it agrees preferred housing sites. You've seen massive housing growth in your area. I've seen massive growth in mine over many years, and there's more to come.
Mm-hmm.
When we have those conversations, adopting local plans, and they being tested and developers adhering to those local plans, and we talk about sustainable housing growth, all of those things, it's all intrinsic with sustainable development, delivering mitigation, which, and again, the mitigations that we're talking about can be small, can be large. Those mitigations are specifically cited in the planning process, legally in heads of terms, agreed. Not everything in the lists of heads of terms is going to be delivered, but quite a lot of it will be. And they are effectively a contract with everybody to say, we agree together, developers, council, to deliver a package that will support that housing growth and deliver mitigations, mostly transport and residents accept that to say, might not be happy about the housing, but I can see there's a package of mitigations that are going to improve my area in very different ways. If we are saying as a local authority that we are not going to be, well, it's very difficult and challenging to deliver many of those mitigations because they are capital spend, but involve future revenue impact on the medium-term financial plan. That's not sustainable moving forward. I don't know necessarily what the answer is, but I do know that whilst we form, and we're going to be working on a new local plan, which will be delivering and citing further housing growth, it will talk about sustainability. It will talk about transport projects. It will talk about aspirations for cycle lanes and for lots of other mitigations, which will tick all the boxes that this council wants to tick and has adopted as policy. How can we as councillors and the public have any confidence that that can be delivered if we roll it back to here, where we're saying, actually, none of that can be delivered? That's the big problem.
Is there, I mean, and that, is there any mechanism for, like, when we build a big housing estate, does your budget go up? I mean, I presume there isn't, but there should be.
My budget doesn't go up. I mean, there's a little bit of extra. Well, actually, the standard spending assessment now for carriageway length no longer increases. The only thing that goes up is the council tax that comes back from those sites. Obviously, if they're outside of our boundaries.
But aside, for instance, in the Snelsmore Range estate, we've got 1,000 houses being built right now, which, you know, at some point the electricity cost of the new street lamps is going to land on your doorstep.
It'll land with my colleagues, but
yeah, you know,
I get the point. Yeah,
does that budget get increased as a result, or do we just ignore that fact and your budget then just gets stressed even further?
It should get increased in line with the asset, but the problem is that the in line with the asset bit doesn't necessarily take into account 22.9 pence going on each unit of electricity.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Which is the shock we've had, you know, time and time again, and we have at least benefited from having a public sector cap, but still the levels have been extreme.
So was at the last full council meeting, there was the cost of a single crossing was asked in a question. And it stated that the electricity cost for a single crossing was about £15,000 a year, which didn't sound right. Have you got any idea where that figure came from, or whether it was even nearly accurate?
It depends on what it is, which sort of crossing. But if you're looking at, I would say 10 to 15,000 is probably a bit of an average. Don't forget, it's on all the time. And there's a surge in the charge when the button's pressed. So I know that doesn't sound very much, but, you know, the crossing goes in there because it's going to be used. So the crossings do get pressed a lot. But it's on all the time. The controller's on all the time. The fail-safe mechanism's on all the time. So it's running 24 hours, 7 days a week, and then it has a surge when it gets used. There is a contentious element about the way that some of the equipment is charged for, which some local authorities we've joined in with this, sort of trying to analyse and challenge to try and bring that cost down.
Is it on a meter or something? How's it work? How's it priced?
It's priced based on standard. Most of the time they're not metered, so most of it is based on a national assessment, because the equipment is regulatory defined, and the standards of it and how, you know, what it does is regulatorily defined. So a crossing's a crossing wherever you go in the country. The equipment is the equipment wherever you go, even from different manufacturers. So what the electricity companies do is assess the equipment based on a standard loading. They know it's on all the time. They know it's set. So it's not, rather than being metered, it's done on this assessment basis. Now, the more complicated your crossing is, or a set of signals with crossings included, then the more expensive it is. But a standard straight across crossing, like we're talking about Station Road, I would guess 10 to 15,000 at current electricity rates is probably about where it is. But of course, that's, you know, for you in your area, and I know you've heard me say this many times before, if you've got 3 crossings, that's 30,000 on top of 130,000 pressure.
a crazy amount of money for running some LED lights and a computer in a box. And I know that that's a real underestimation of what they are, but
Yeah.
these days that is all they are. That has enough processing power to run a crossing. So the fact that you can end up spending £15,000 to run a computer in a box, to me is just unbelievable. I mean, I'm not blaming you. It's just it is an unbelievable amount of money for a few LED lights and a mobile phone.
I also
I found that astounding.
I understand why each one isn't metered, because that would be an administrative nightmare, wouldn't it?
But we've changed from, when there were not LED lights, there was quite a draw and there was quite a power involved. Now we're on LED lights. The electricity cost of running these things should be less than a domestic fridge.
So,
I know that's, but it really should be.
So what we've done over the years is drop down to ultra low voltage. So most of our equipment, we've been systematically for 15 years using capital program and improvement grants to change from, like say, standard lamps down to LEDs and go for ultra low voltage inputs and stuff. And we've been bringing down the net cost. So last year, our net cost from that capital investment was probably about 25 grand saving, but it's all gone in a click with the unit cost.
It is a shocking figure.
It's a shocking figure to think it would cost that to run one process. It doesn't.
That's got to be questioned, surely. It just seems like an enormous amount of money. Surely we must be able to do some kind of check. And
I mean, that's an aggregated element. So we have got some crossings where a couple of years ago, 2017, 2018, we looked at the actual draw on some. And we've got some crossings where the figure is under £10,000, but they tend to be very small, and they've got certain equipment in. Then when we get up to sort of expansive crossings and ones that are going to go over a certain usage, then the price does go up. But the charge for the push button is something which local authorities are wanting to discuss, because.
You've blown me away with how much they are. I mean, how much is a zebra crossing?
Well, very little, you see, because there's no surge.
No, you're right, there is no surge. It's
got flashing bulbs, isn't it?
See, in our ward, we have High Street has got a zebra crossing on it, and we want it changed to a traffic control. I'm not sure we'll be getting that now.
I've been for putting a plunge slot on top of the button.
Good luck with that one.
Coming back to Councillor Holmes's point, I think you're absolutely right. We end up here into local authorities are almost each themselves, in terms of having the wrong sort of money and the right sort of appetite, the wrong sort of money. And when you look at the national agendas around centres of activity, active travel, and we finding ourselves trapped by revenue. The answer here is probably buying in the way that we treat, or the way that the rules allow us to treat that commuter zone. We can come to some agreement or understanding if the rules, because don't forget we take this stuff under legislative rules. If there's some way of releasing that commuter sum so it's over the life of the project, or life of the asset, rather than it based on gross replacement, then we've got an opportunity. And the reassurance that I know I've tried to advertise this to you before, we are going forward with bringing those projects of yours into the capital programme. We are going to take them into design. We are going to draw the money down so the funding won't go up. Thing that I know is frustrating, I can't give you a date when I'll put them in, because I've got to solve the money issue, or the councillor's going to solve the money issue.
I mean, Chair, look, I don't want this to turn into this issue that we have in Mickleover, but just to try and widen this up. So, because it's nothing personal, Nigel, I'm just going to keep going at this one. But Councillor Prosser, the example you gave, and you're on the planning committee as well, one of the big issues actually is a lot of the housing growth in Mickleover has been outside of the boundary, so South Derbyshire. So the impact and mitigations are needed in Derby City, and yet the council tax is collected by South Derbyshire. So we're talking about, hopefully your housing footprint is within.
It's 50-50 actually.
Right, well,
That development is, but
yeah.
there's an awful lot of development just on the edge of that.
Yeah, so there is some revenue, but only if it's within Derby City. So that will obviously come into the council tax pot, and then obviously budgets in general can raise a little bit to compensate. Just a couple of other things though. So on planning again, it's straying off this a little bit, but when we have to sit and decide on a major scheme, and we talk about heads of terms and how that is very important to the decision we're making for mitigation, to actually be a contributing factor to either approval or rejection. You know, if we haven't got confidence that those things can be delivered, it really does disrupt the whole process. So I won't.
No,
I'll just plant that as a
just on that
marker.
What I honestly don't know or can't pull out of my brain is whether when you're in planning committee and you're looking at that assessment, whether you have, and you have to take some advice from planning officers because it's put into a bit of detail, whether or not you can ask for it to be portioned into revenue type activity.
Yeah.
Strictly speaking, I don't think that Section 106 is necessarily correct. It's how it's treated for governance purposes. It's just whether or not there's latitude in the process. I am talking here without having secure knowledge about whether or not you can say, we'll have that, we expect that, and we want X to cover the cost for 10 years or
To deal with your issue. Yes. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah,
Finally,
where we've got to
yeah, and that's something we can take on board. And finally, Chair, 106 in general, timeouts. So I was in the exec scrutiny committee and we put a recommendation to cabinet about, we've had this in Chelmsford years ago, about 300 grand was lost.
Before my time.
Yeah, but we knew about it because when we
heard about it afterwards. Before my time, it went back.
And everyone said at the time, it wasn't to do with us, but we saw it and we said, you know, never again should this happen where that amount of money is lost effectively and handed back to developers without delivering what was on 106.
Handed back in 2005.
Something like that.
Because they just didn't spend
I've
it.
always remembered that.
Yeah.
And it was mentioned and I put posed a recommendation to cabinet to ensure that we don't hand back 106. And I cited a couple of Darling Ward 106, which technically timed out on the 17th of the 9th this year. I don't know what small amounts, sort of relatively small amounts, 6,000 something, nearly 7,000. I don't know what happened to those 106, but also the big one is Little Overward, and that's 213,000, and that times out on the 1st of the 6th next year. Now,
That needs spending.
well, the cabinet member, I didn't look at the cabinet, I wasn't at the cabinet, but I was told that the cabinet member or a cabinet member in the cabinet meeting reassured the public or whoever that under this administration, no 106 would be returned. I think that's pretty, if it's wrong, fair enough, but I think that's what he said. So that's a big worry for me because whilst you look at the spreadsheet that's been sent to all councils, if you look from an officer,
The amount that gets spent is ridiculously small, right?
Yeah, yeah.
You know, the same item comes back time and time and time again.
Yeah.
It's massively
Yeah,
small.
but all of our wards, if you look at the tabs, I've noticed two where you've got imminent and potentially already handed back, but we've all got in our wards future dates where significant amount of money might time out, and that's a big worry for me. This whole thing about how, you know, drawing it down and actually using it, we cannot be affording to hand it back.
No, I agree.
So I don't know. I'll stop there, but we just need all to be working together on
So that
that.
becomes words we don't need to go down.
Well,
Last time, honestly,
Because it's a massive bugbear of ours.
yeah.
And that money spent is just frustrating.
So
There's a little bit of assurance around it that what we've tried to do is to give Section 106 great primacy in the capital programme if we can. I mean, it standard there where we get government grant and it's got a drop dead date on it and stuff, so that pushes. But with the council's ability for unsecured borrowing, basically, it's not in a position to do that. And 106 is sort of beginning to fill some of that breach, if you like. I think the Harley one's probably have been programmed. I know that I'm aware of the one for 200,000 that you mentioned that is programmed up, and it would have been programmed this year if it wasn't for various backlog. There is just a little issue as well where we had stuff that maybe was at year 5 in 2019. Timelines accelerated because we basically lost 2 years, 2020 and 2020. And you know the story, you know exactly what we were doing, and actually that made the program really difficult because anything for that 2-year period that needed a traffic survey, you couldn't go and do a legitimate.
Yeah,
Because
the pandemics and things like that. But obviously, it's the way it is. But yeah,
If you, let's say, if it was year 5, like you say we had it for 10 years and it was year 5 in 2019, all of a sudden we're at the skinny end of it, and
you would hope then that would just get extended by 2 years on an automatic basis.
be a very reasonable approach.
You mean it's not being done like that?
It's a question that we need to push hard on.
Okay. So now us.
Who decides where the 106 money goes?
Really good question. I mean, fundamentally, like I say, it's local councillors because the impacts are in the wards.
We've had the most, building in Armore, like all the DRI section, and we've not had no money.
Often doesn't feel like we have very much in your.
Yeah, and it's not had nothing really. Yeah, when we talked about this the other day, well, and other wards take them or wherever it goes with it.
Well, with yours, that was the National Health Service. The National Health Service was paying for the hospital to go in.
And then what the houses?
Oh, how many houses were there?
These Castle Ward, there's about 3,000 houses.
And you've had nothing else 106?
Up to now, yeah, we've not had enough.
Chair. I mean, I apologise for talking too much, but
Just
these are issues that are, relevant to my peak interests. One of them is 106, obviously. Yeah. Ward committees again. There needs to be more engagement with ward committees. Just like we need it on a standing agenda item.
Yeah.
6
106.
This is on ours.
Yeah, but it needs to be right. So
We've been discussing that over the
Yeah.
last 2 years and nothing's ever been spent.
Yeah.
So it doesn't need to be on the agenda, it needs to be actioned.
yeah, exactly. So there just needs to be a periodic check and balance with councillors. Like, this is the money that you have. These are the dates that it will expire. This is what it's cited to deliver. And just an update. As you get towards those dates, then councillors can say, right, we're getting within a year, we need to start thinking about drawing that down, putting it in the capital scheme, getting it scheduled in, to avoid this confusion over who's got what, when it's going to be delivered. Because sometimes, okay, probably less so with a full yearly electoral cycle, but previous years, councillors were changing, it was all changing all the time. And you couldn't get grip really of where you were. So I think it definitely would be worthwhile for officers. It's not your job, Joe, I get that, but we need officers to take ownership of that. And then during the locality team, we have these meetings. It needs to be something which councillors have that discussion, take ownership of and understand, rather than just a spreadsheet come through on an email every so often for an officer. There needs to be more engagement so he'll fully understand it.
I think there's a bit of an overview of section 106 and how to make progress as well. There's those sorts of things where there's a trigger in it, and we just need to keep.
Yeah, we need so many houses built.
Communicate, don't we, around where those triggers are, because that changes the expectation. But it also gives us the idea then of we're trying to move the capital programme away from annual to a 5-year investment type period. It's proven sticky because we're unpicking 25 years worth of embedded practice that's led us to a point where we end up over programmed every year. We can deliver about 60% of it. Very good. That's just a fact. So, we're trying to get away from that program better. But if we knew now that, say, in year 2, year 3, there's a trigger point going to be hit by development, then we can start a program for that now, so that you've got some visibility of it, but also council spend profile can accommodate that as well. So I think there is generally different way of communicating around what section 106, and probably a bit more of an approach collectively around sort of what is 106 in each part of the city, and what we want to prioritize with it, particularly where we get these ideas where we've got a sum for an area and there aren't specific themes. Well, what do we want to do? Because around the DRI, you know, the functioning hospital, if you like, rather than the old site, lots and lots and lots of money spent on parking schemes over an extended period. But, you know, crikey, that was a massive effort, you know, because of the amount of consultation you have to go through, the re-consultation, the re-consultation, test and trial. So we probably spent about 8 years rolling out schemes. And I'm not saying that they weren't valid or they don't do something for the residents, but in some areas you sort of think, is that what we want to go down? And it's not our choice, you know, we're very much led by the local intelligence, etc. themselves. But there seems to be a pause and reflect on those sorts of things.
Yeah, I get it. What I think a recommendation we should make is that we send something to all the localities managers that they try and get S106 on their neighbourhood board agendas. I know it's a standing one on ours, and I can tell you that Celia and going forward, Mr. Lake or Councillor Lakin, and in the past when it was Councillor Jennings and Councillor McChrystal and myself, we used to have a yearly meeting with Rachel Reid to go through it as well as have it at the neighbourhood board, and I think that's good practice. So I would suggest that all wards do that as well, because it is, you know, it's a crime to give that money back. So when you give that money back, that goes straight into bonuses for the bosses.
Yeah,
you know, it's a crime to do that.
Yeah,
and our residents suffer. So I think the rest of my recommendation would be to speak to all localities managers and encourage them to put S106 on the agenda of their neighbourhood boards.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yep. Okay, any more questions? But Nigel, he's had quite a grilling of us. He's had an hour and a half of us. He must be exhausted. I know I am. Well, thank you very much. That was very informative. And yeah, I enjoyed that. It's such a hot topic for all of us, because I know whenever we're driving through our ward and you see the brake lights going on the car, thinking, please don't be traffic lights, don't be traffic lights. And it's so much relief when it's somebody turning right. And then when there is traffic light saying, your heart sinks because you think, I know what's doing these. And as we understand things, brain, we do, but it's very frustrating. You know, especially when it seems to be in the same place over and over again. And understand, again, speaking in my ward, because I don't look at any others, we have an area just near the Canal Bridge where it branches off to Symphony Avenue and so on. And I know it's the main junction of all of the utilities. And that's the bit that's always going to be raging. You know, so I get everybody's frustration. We've got 3 or 4-way traffic lights there. It's a nightmare. But we do what we can. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
Sergeant.
I enjoyed that. Right, so item 6 then, work programme topic review. Lindsay, is it you? Look at anything on this?
Well, just for the next meeting, basically, what do you want to bring to the next meeting? Do you want
to bring the assembly rooms?
Yeah, the project assemble, because I'm hearing that there's been some progress, some work going on that we probably need to know about. So, you know, I'm ready and waiting for that one.
I think that should be the next meeting.
Yeah, for me, Chair, it's such an important area of the city.
They're also worth discussing.
Well,
there's the whole range opposite.
Yeah.
We went round Guildhall the other week and the theatre, but the whole range is just derelict.
Yeah, marketplace in general. And I think that project overarching is exactly that. It's intrinsic, and I think that if officers are going to give us briefing in the next meeting, then I'm sure with confidence that building will be drawn into that conversation.
But there's the Guildhall Theatre and there's the 2 next door, which is just
So for me, Chair, that is something which we really do need to start.
Market Hall.
This is what we're talking about. We need that conversation to hear from officers what the plans are. Because it's been what Project Ensemble has been cited for some time now, and we haven't had any formal updates in this committee or any other, as far as I'm aware, on practicalities. So we need to start talking about it and finding out what the plan is.
Do we all agree on that? Yeah.
And if we can involve the market hall in it, because as you say, that's absolutely intrinsic in revitalising the market.
If you look at, I mean, I couldn't believe the Acropolis Cafe's closed down. I mean, you know, he did do the best bacon sandwich. Not that I'm an expert on these things, but it did great food on a budget, and it's closed because the footfall just isn't there anymore.
And of course, Chair,
47 years it's been there.
well, we know that the Quad have had spoken to the council for a grant loan, whatever, if you want, but you know, they're on their own effectively.
Yeah,
So
completely.
it's not fair on them to have an area that is what it is, and they're trying to, you know, be really the sole sort of point of focus there. So yeah, we've got to start talking about it.
I agree entirely. So can we have that brought to the next meeting, please? Lovely, thank you very much indeed. Right. One. Oh, that's it. Okay. I thought there was another one. Well, thank you all very much indeed, ladies and gentlemen. I think that's been very good, actually. I